Every morning for 10 years, I walked into the lobby of Ryland Tech Solutions just after sunrise. Nobody looked up. The security guards barely nodded. The receptionist never asked my name. I wore the same beige cardigan, carried the same worn-out leather bag, and took the same service elevator to the basement level, HR records and facilities management. My name is Mia Dawson, but in this building, I was just that admin girl from downstairs. The one who quietly typed up files, updated employee records, and brought coffee during executive visits. I sat behind a shared desk in a low-ceilinged office with flickering lights and no windows. When people from upper floors needed something, they emailed HR support, never knowing or caring who responded. And I never corrected them, because I had a secret, one that had taken root years ago, in silence, and slowly grown into something much, much bigger. 10 years earlier, Ryland Tech was on the verge of collapse, a promising AI company with too many ideas and not enough capital. Back then, I wasn't an admin. I was a junior financial analyst at a rival firm, working 80-hour weeks and going nowhere. Until one afternoon, I stumbled on an internal leak. Ryland's founder was quietly looking for an anonymous investor to help him avoid a hostile takeover. I had just received a modest inheritance after my mother's passing. It wasn't much by Wall Street standards, but enough. Enough to make a move no one saw coming. I contacted the founder through a proxy. I offered a silent partnership. My only condition? Full anonymity. I didn't want board seats, no press, no titles, just ownership. Quiet, documented, and binding. He agreed. He was desperate. And just like that, I became the silent owner of 52% of Ryland Tech. Over the next 3 years, the company exploded. Their new product, an adaptive learning platform, revolutionized corporate training. Ryland was hailed as a tech underdog miracle. The CEO, Dylan Crane, became a darling of the media, but no one ever mentioned the name of the person who'd kept the company alive. No one even knew, and that was fine. That was the plan, until I saw what the company was becoming. I watched from the shadows as Dylan took full credit for Ryland's success, claiming it was his grit and vision that saved the company. I watched promising engineers get pushed out. I saw the old founder, the man who'd made a deal with me, shoved into retirement and replaced with a boardroom full of yes-men. I watched as people like me, quiet, competent, unnoticed, were overlooked, mocked, dismissed. And then one afternoon I heard it. "Who's that?" An executive VP asked, pointing vaguely in my direction as he passed my desk in the basement hallway. "Oh, her?" Someone replied with a smirk. "Just admin support. Nobody important." Nobody important. It wasn't the first time I'd been dismissed like that, but something about the casual cruelty in their voices that day stuck with me. That's when I decided I wouldn't stay silent forever. I didn't want the spotlight, but I wanted respect. So I started paying attention. I read every internal financial report that came through HR. I listened carefully during coffee runs and hallway meetings. I learned which departments were over budget. I saw who took credit for others' work. I watched as Dylan steered the company into increasingly risky waters, chasing prestige and headlines over sustainability. And I waited. 10 years passed like this. I never missed a day. I became part of the building's invisible background. My wardrobe never changed. My smile never drew attention. But behind my quiet eyes, I knew everything. Then came the contract. I overheard whispers in the executive elevator about a multi-million-dollar partnership with a major international firm, a deal that would triple Ryland's market share. But there was a catch. The partner company required a unanimous shareholder signature before closing. Every owner, even the anonymous ones, had to sign. That's when panic set in upstairs. They couldn't find the majority owner. I watched from my desk as Dylan barked at assistants, demanded private investigators, called legal teams. "Find this damn ghost shareholder," he shouted during a call I overheard through the thin walls. "We need their signature now." And I smiled, because after 10 years of being invisible, it was time. Time for them to learn who had been in the building all along. Not the coffee girl, Not the admin, not nobody, but Mia Dawson, majority owner of Ryland Tech, and the one person Dylan Crane could not afford to ignore anymore. The tension in the building shifted almost overnight. What had been a calm hum of quiet arrogance among the executives turned into a silent panic. Everyone walked faster. Voices were sharper. Meetings multiplied. Something was happening, and the walls were closing in on the people who used to ignore me. I kept my head down and listened. The anonymous majority shareholder, me, was now the most sought-after person in the building, even if no one knew it yet. The boardroom was on fire with speculation. Legal teams were digging through decades of ownership records, tracing trusts, foundations, shell companies. All they found were dead ends. They had no idea that the owner they were desperately searching for had walked past them in the elevator that very morning. That I had smiled at Dylan's assistant while she frantically organized yet another shareholder emergency meeting. That the woman everyone still called HR support held the only signature that could save them. Dylan Crane was unraveling. At 41, he was still boyishly handsome, always dressed in custom-fitted suits, his voice smooth like a seasoned politician. But now his confidence was cracking. I watched him yell at his secretary over the wrong brand of bottled water. I heard the frustration in his voice when he screamed into his phone in his office, door slightly ajar, about incompetent fools who can't find a simple signature. Meanwhile, I waited. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. You see, I didn't want to be the villain in this story. But I also wasn't going to let the same people who had looked through me, stepped over me, and belittled me now pretend to respect me just because they needed something. Respect built on desperation isn't respect. It's survival. They hadn't earned my signature yet. 2 days later, an internal memo leaked. The partnership deal, it turned out, was not just valuable. It was critical. Ryland Tech had overextended itself through rapid expansion, banking on this merger to stabilize cash flow. If the deal fell through, the company would likely have to lay off hundreds. Morale dipped. Rumors spread. Everyone became a little quieter in the cafeteria. Still, no one looked at me. They passed me in the hallway, eyes glazed, too stressed to bother acknowledging the admin who restocked their printer paper. And I realized something. In this building, value was never about contribution. It was about visibility, status, titles, proximity to power. They still didn't see me. And then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was walking back from the downstairs kitchenette, a mug of coffee in hand, when I heard my name over the intercom. Mia Dawson, please report to the 24th floor executive suite. Immediately. Heads turned. For the first time in years, people actually noticed me. I felt their confused stares. Some whispered. Others just looked surprised that I even had a name. I took the elevator up, slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. When the doors opened, the air on the executive floor felt colder, polished, quiet, like everyone was holding their breath. Dylan was standing near the window, talking fast into his phone. He paused when he saw me. "Mia, come in," he said with a forced smile. "Thanks for coming up. We, need your help." I stepped in without a word. The room was filled with faces I knew well, men and women who had never once returned a smile, who used to pass me without acknowledgement. Now they looked like they were sitting through a job interview. "We understand you're somehow connected to the entity holding the majority shares of Ryland Tech," Dylan said carefully, choosing every word like it was made of glass. I tilted my head. "Why would you think that?" He cleared his throat. "We've received some indications. There were flags tied to a set of proxy investments, and a few internal legal cross-references led to your name. Honestly, we're not sure what's going on, but if there's any chance you know the party holding the majority stake, we'd really appreciate your help. This deal is important." Important. That word again. The same word they never used when I flagged broken HR processes or when I handled 18 employee disputes in a week. Important. Suddenly I was important. Not because of my mind, my work, or my loyalty, but because of a pen. I looked at Dylan. Really looked at him. This was the man who had once handed me his trash after a boardroom lunch without looking up. Who had once joked that basement staff were like plumbing. You only notice them when something goes wrong. And now, here he was, hoping I could solve the problem. I didn't answer him. Not yet. Instead, I walked over to the tall glass window behind the boardroom table, looking out at the city I had lived in my whole life. The skyline had changed in 10 years, just like I had. I turned back around and met their eyes, every single one of them. "You want the signature?" I said, voice calm. "But what I want is something entirely different." They shifted in their chairs, uncomfortable, nervous, and I smiled. Because now the game had truly begun. Over the weekend, I stayed quiet. Not a single call, not a single follow-up email. I let the silence do the work. By Monday morning, the anxiety inside Ryland Tech had reached a fever pitch. While the executives were scrambling to review their performance reports, recheck financial statements, and prepare their excuses, I sat calmly in my small apartment sipping tea. I had spent 10 years preparing for this moment. I wasn't in a rush now. At 9 a.m. sharp, I walked into the building. This time, not through the rear entrance, not through the side elevator used by facilities staff, but through the gleaming glass front doors where everyone could see me. The lobby was buzzing. People paused mid-conversation. Some pretended not to stare. Others looked away quickly when I caught their eye. It was working. They were starting to see me. Dylan's assistant, Lisa, who had once forwarded my emails without reading them, met me by the elevators, practically bowing. "Ms. Dawson," she said breathlessly, "they're all waiting for you upstairs." I nodded. Good. This time I took the executive elevator. Alone. No longer the invisible admin. No longer the background noise. I was the storm they never saw coming. When the doors opened on the 24th floor, the full board was already assembled. Plus Dylan, pacing near the window with dark circles under his eyes. His suit was still crisp, but the illusion of control had long since evaporated. They all turned when I walked in. I didn't wait for pleasantries. "Let's begin," I said, taking the head seat again. The room snapped to attention. No more fake smiles, no more dismissive glances. For the first time, I could feel the shift, the slow recognition of who I was, and what I now represented. Dylan cleared his throat. "Mia, we've reviewed your terms," he said, "and we're willing to accept most of them." "Most?" I asked. "The Employee Oversight Committee, the pay reviews, the diversity report? All of that is fine. But the executive performance reviews? The bonus freezes? That's going to create unrest. It sends the wrong message to the market." I leaned forward. "You're worried about the message?" Let me tell you what message was sent when the company paid its top 5 execs over $10 million in bonuses last year, while 24 support staff were quietly laid off. That's the message I'm correcting. He opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't let him. This company's culture is broken, and until that's fixed, there's no deal. Period. The CFO, an older man with a voice like gravel, spoke up. "Ms. Dawson, the market is watching. This deal is already in the press. If it collapses, our valuation tanks. We'll lose investor confidence overnight." "Then it sounds like you should act fast," I replied, "before that confidence disappears." There was a long pause. Then Dylan spoke again, more quietly this time. "You've already won, Mia. You're the majority shareholder. You could fire me today if you wanted to. So why all of this? Why not just sign and move on?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man who had built his empire on charm, on image, on being the face of a company he didn't truly understand. "Because it's not about revenge," I said. "It's about rebuilding something with value. You can't build a legacy on the backs of people you refuse to acknowledge." I let that hang in the air. "For 10 years, I gave you the chance to do better. You chose the spotlight. I chose the work. And now that work has brought us here. There was nothing left to say. I opened my folder, pulled out the final version of the contract, and set it on the table. I'll sign when these terms are approved by formal board vote. Not whispered promises, not nods. I want it on record. The legal advisor nodded, already preparing the motion. As the board began the process, I stood and walked to the window. The city stretched out before me. A decade ago, I had stood on this very floor and watched the skyline from behind a cleaning cart. Now I was watching it from the head seat of the boardroom. The view hadn't changed, but I had. By noon, the vote was unanimous. Every term I listed was officially adopted. The documents were signed. The merger would move forward, with protections for the people who actually kept the company running. The deal wasn't just a financial win anymore. It was a moral one. Dylan didn't speak as I left the room. He just watched me, a strange mixture of shame, confusion, and reluctant respect on his face. And I didn't need to say anything more. Because sometimes the most powerful statement is simply being seen and making sure others are too. Word traveled fast. By Tuesday morning, the story was everywhere. Anonymous majority shareholder rescues Ryland Tech deal. Read the headlines. Analysts speculated. Employees whispered. LinkedIn blew up. But no one had the full story. No one knew how the invisible hand behind Ryland Tech had stepped into the light. Except the people inside this building. And now, they couldn't stop watching me. I wasn't walking the halls anymore. I was gliding through them. The same employees who once walked past me like I was part of the wallpaper now stopped mid-conversation when I entered the break room. Some nodded shyly. Others approached hesitantly, as if unsure how to act now that the admin from downstairs had become the woman who controlled their future. But I wasn't here for admiration. I was here to make structural change. I spent the week meeting with department heads, not just the high-profile ones from the top floors, but the quiet, overworked managers from payroll, logistics, and customer service. People who actually kept the business functioning while executives took the credit. For the first time in years, they were being seen. One morning, I visited the warehouse operations center. A grizzled man with grease-stained hands and a skeptical look stood waiting. "You're Mia Dawson?" he asked. I nodded. He stared for a moment, then laughed. "I always thought you were one of us. I just didn't realize you were the one." We shook hands. Firm, honest, real. And that meant more than any headline ever could. But not everyone was pleased. Dylan kept a low profile. He hadn't spoken to the press, hadn't attended most of the board's new compliance meetings. Rumors flew. Some said he was furious. Others said he was plotting to reclaim control. I didn't care. His reign had always been about appearance, and now that the curtain had been pulled back, there was nothing left to hide behind. Still, I wasn't naive. People like Dylan don't go quietly. They wait for shadows, for weaknesses. And right on cue, on Friday afternoon, he called for a private meeting. I agreed. We met in the same boardroom where I had confronted the entire executive team just days before. But this time, it was just the two of us. No advisors, no staff, just Mia and Dylan. He was already seated when I arrived, nursing a glass of scotch at 2 p.m., a bad sign. His tie was loosened, his jacket draped carelessly over a chair. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but in presence. "You win," he said, not looking up. "You made your point. You got your applause, so now what? You going to fire me?" I sat across from him, folding my hands calmly. "You think this is about applause?" He looked at me finally, eyes bloodshot, voice tight. "Don't pretend this wasn't personal. You sat in the basement for a decade, taking notes while we ran the show. You waited until the perfect moment, then you crushed me. That's revenge, not leadership." "No," I said quietly. "That's accountability." He laughed bitterly. "Accountability? For what? Building a billion-dollar company?" "No," I replied. "For building it on the backs of people you never bothered to thank. For pushing out the founder who gave you your start. For using every room you walked into like a mirror so you could admire yourself instead of the people who worked under you. Dylan's shoulders dropped. The fight was bleeding out of him. "You know, I used to believe I was the company," he muttered. "That's the problem," I said. "You thought the face of a company mattered more than its backbone." Silence settled between us. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Do I keep pretending to be useful until you push me out?" I leaned forward. "You have two choices, Dylan. Step down gracefully and retain some legacy, or be removed next week when the board meets to vote on leadership restructuring. I already have the numbers." He stared at me, processing, realizing this wasn't a threat. It was a fact. "And if I resign?" "We announce it as part of a leadership realignment following a successful merger," I said. "You get to walk away with dignity, maybe even write a book." "And if I fight?" I met his gaze, steady. "Then the story becomes about how the man who ignored the majority shareholder for 10 years tried to sabotage the company's future out of pride. And trust me, that headline won't age well." For a moment, he looked like he might argue. But then something cracked. Maybe pride. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe the realization that his reign had ended, not with applause, but with indifference. He nodded once, slowly. "Fine," he said. "You win." "No," I corrected gently. "We win. The company wins. The people who've been invisible for too long, they win." He stood, collected his jacket, and without another word, walked out of the room. As the door closed behind him, I sat alone for a long moment. This wasn't the end. But it was the beginning of something better. Something real. The following Monday, Ryland Tech looked different, not from the outside. The building still stood tall, the glass still gleamed in the morning sun, and the lobby still echoed with the sound of heels and polished shoes crossing the marble floor. But beneath that shine, something had shifted. You could feel it. In the way people greeted each other, in the way they paused before speaking, in the way their eyes searched, as if wondering who they had overlooked before. As for me, I walked through the main entrance like I belonged. Because now, everyone knew I did. The signature meeting had been scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. The final step, the moment when the merger would be made official. Signed, sealed, and sent to the press. A multi-million-dollar deal months in the making. And until now, one thing had kept it from closing. Mine. When I stepped off the elevator, the entire top floor was bustling. Cameras were being set up for the official announcement. Executives in tailored suits lined the hallway. Legal teams reviewed contracts. News anchors rehearsed their intros. They were expecting a show, and I was ready to give them one. I walked into the boardroom to find every seat filled. The new leadership team, the partner company's representatives, the media consultants, everyone had shown up for this. Everyone except Dylan. True to his word, he had stepped down on Friday, leaving quietly without a statement. His office had already been cleared, his name removed from the glass door. I took his old seat, now mine, at the head of the table. Across from me sat the CEO of Linsford Systems, the company we were merging with. He was a sharp, silver-haired man with a calm demeanor and a reputation for valuing integrity over flash. We had spoken on the phone twice before, but this was our first in-person meeting. "Ms. Dawson," he said warmly, "an honor to meet the person who's been behind the curtain all along." I smiled. "It's nice to finally step into the light." He nodded toward the document placed between us. "Whenever you're ready." I picked up the pen. For a moment, I paused, not out of hesitation, but reflection. 10 years ago, I was typing reports no one read. 10 years ago, I was delivering coffee and printing payroll summaries while executives talked over me. 10 years ago, they called me nobody. Now all eyes were on me. I signed. The room erupted in polite applause. Camera shutters clicked. Hands were shaken, agreements were exchanged. But I didn't stay for long. I stood, thanked everyone for coming, and left the room before they could hand me a mic or draft a statement. I wasn't here to perform. I was here to build something worth believing in. By noon, I was back in my new office. The same office that had once belonged to Dylan. But I had already made changes. The oversized desk had been replaced with something simpler. The ego wall full of awards and magazine covers had been taken down. In their place, a whiteboard covered in handwritten notes and a pinboard filled with employee photos. This wasn't just an office anymore. It was a promise. That afternoon, I called a company-wide meeting. Not for shareholders or press, but for the employees, the ones who had always gone unnoticed. I stood on the stage in the main conference hall, facing hundreds of people, with more watching from satellite offices via live stream. Most of you know my name now, I began, but for a long time you didn't. And that's okay, because today isn't about me. It's about us. It's about the people this company has overlooked, ignored, and undervalued for far too long. That changes today. I watched eyes widen, heads nod. Some people even clapped. I know what it's like to feel invisible, I continued, to be in the room but never acknowledged. But I also know the power of quiet work, of showing up every day even when no one notices. This company was built on that kind of work. And going forward, we're going to honor it. I announced the first wave of promotions from internal referrals, raised starting wages for all support and maintenance staff, launched a mentorship initiative that paired executives with frontline employees, and lastly, I created a new role, Chief People Officer, to ensure that no one in the building ever felt invisible again. When the meeting ended, I stayed behind to speak with employees. Some shook my hand. Some hugged me. One older woman, a janitor named Anna, who had worked there for 22 years, took my hand with tears in her eyes. "You didn't just change the company," she whispered. "You changed the story." I smiled. That's the idea. That night, long after the building had emptied, I stood alone in my office. The lights of the city blinked outside. Somewhere across town, Dylan was probably telling someone that he used to be CEO of Ryland Tech. But no one would believe him, because he didn't look the part anymore. And as for me, I still came in early, just like always. Still brewed my own coffee. Still wore the same simple cardigan on some days. But now, when I walked through those glass doors, everyone knew. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one you never saw coming.